Hi, folks. I'm feeling called today to speak about emptiness and coming in contact with emptiness through the awakening process. I guess I'll probably talk about some of my experiences, what it may or may not mean, and how to navigate that space because it can be a relatively difficult one to navigate, difficult terrain to be in. And I think, this sense of emptiness that can arise as a part of the awakening process really helps to attune us to spacious, silent, not knowing. So there's the kind of state of consciousness experience of it, which might be in meditation, or you might be thrust into it by a life experience. It could creep up on you slowly. Or maybe it's an all-pervasive sensation that is just louder or quieter depending on what else is going on at the time. But the state of consciousness itself has a way of informing how we are in the world. And that's the whole point of any kind of state of consciousness from my perspective. And that's just one perspective, is actually not to perpetually dwell in that state of consciousness or try and seek it out or try and hold on to it, but actually to learn from it and then to take that learning into the way that we inhabit our humanity. So for me, I think what emptiness has taught me is really about being able to open right out, to not crowd experiences with intentions, thoughts, expectations, ideas. It's the capacity aspect of consciousness. So emptiness is training us to have a larger vessel, a more vast and expansive vessel in which to be able to hold the experiences that arrive and disappear. So for me, emptiness or the state of consciousness of emptiness arose quite early on. I would say even before like the real main portion of my awakening process kicked off. And because I was not a very healthy human when I started experiencing this, in my emotional and trauma body, there was a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. And so when I was confronting these experiences of emptiness, it was just too much, too much no-thing-ness. And the felt sense of my own continuity with that no-thing-ness really impacted me in ways that themselves could be positioned as traumatic, because it took me a very long time to kind of reclaim this emptiness and remember it as a really beautiful, profound experience within being. So firstly is, if you have kind of contacted this felt sense or this direct experience of emptiness and yourself as emptiness and found it shocking or painful or grief-inducing, then I think this is quite normal and there's nothing wrong with you. And there is ways in which that impact, that intensity of it will soften over time and make room for perhaps a different way of viewing that emptiness. So the felt sense of emptiness, how would I describe it? And I know there's a lot of really wonderful descriptions, particularly in the Buddhist literature, which, you know, really is a good reference point because they tend to specialize in emptiness, although I think it is very much present in most of the traditions in some form. But from my own perspective, uh, the disappearance of identity structures, the disappearance of a sense of self, is, I guess, the mental layer of that, you know, my capacity to locate uh, it's always words that fail. Yeah, locating a sense of self just kind of goes disappears into the nothingness. And in the place of that sense of self is kind of a deep awareness of the organism as just an unfolding phenomena, and not only an unfolding a phenomena, but a phenomena that feels quite immaterial. That's not necessarily, you know, it might be that the momentary experience of like moving my hand or making a cup of tea, it's all happening. There's a consciousness of that, but it's almost like it's translucent. You know, there's not really any stuffness to that experience. And this can bring up a huge amount of terror, of fear, uh, because those parts of the ego structure that are perhaps still present, because there will be, you know, aspects um, that are kind of connecting with the experience and uh, undergoing it as an experience, they can be quite scared because it's like they're dissolving or disappearing in that moment. And if you suddenly started, you know, if your hands and your arms and your legs started just evaporating suddenly, of course you would be profoundly scared. So there's that emotional response level that can be present. When emptiness is yielded to, when there can be a softness and an allowing of that state of consciousness, or not state of consciousness, but let's say aspect of consciousness, one kind of the facets of expressions of consciousness, and a very deep one. You know, I recognize that some traditions see it as the deepest. That's not the case in my tradition or my personal experience, so I'm just going to name it as one of the facets. Um, so that facet can become incredibly peaceful because there is no thing to uh, be concerned. You know, there is no um, materiality in which to provide tension or polarity. Um, so as long as the ego is able to kind of soften and yield and be in that space without so much fear, it's an incredibly peaceful, vast, expansive, chamberless chamber. You know, it's the vessel with no walls. Emptiness is the vessel with no walls. Being present in that space can be a retreat from the stresses of functioning in the world, but it can also become a snare, uh, which can prevent us from returning to the world and participating in this really miraculous life that we've been given. So I think it's good to keep that in mind, that as we lean into um, opening and yielding to the experience of emptiness, yes, it is desirable that we can get comfortable in that space, but perhaps less desirable to feel like that's the only place we should ever be forever. Because we do have a human body and a human being, and we have relationships and responsibilities and a life to live. So, how to be with emptiness and still be, be in the world but not of the world is a wonderful way of putting it. Um, you know, there's a middle point, or a way in which those two things of being very densely materially attuned versus experiencing things as so immaterial that they're literally empty of anything, any meaning, any concept, any, there's a balancing point between those two, which for me represents a more healthful way of embodying emptiness. Or actually, that might be a better way of saying it, as an embodiment of emptiness, as opposed to using emptiness to retreat from the human. And I think the way that I would describe experiencing that is, yeah, there's like an openness to uh, to all things. So it's like taking the focus of our awareness from, say, just this tree here, and again, it's the veselless vessel. It's the chamber without walls that just expands outwards, and you have an awareness of that particular being. You have an awareness of their immateriality, but you also have an appreciation for their form, for their materiality. And so there's a way in which you can interact with things and very deeply engage with the materiality of their nature. And at the same time, it's like, you're not reducing them down to that. So maybe this is one way of looking at it, is the way that emptiness might become embodied and might be able to inform your way of being, is that emptiness allows your mind to release the very specific projections that you're attributing individual things. So the seeing through that comes with emptiness, this transparency or translucency, where materiality is less fixed, gives you the capacity to be absolutely open-ended about what's arising. And that open-endedness, you can feel how there's emptiness on the end. Right? It's like materiality is arising. If it was to move along a timeline, which is our conception of it, or our experience of it anyway, if it moves along a timeline, there's a sense of materiality to what is here in the moment, but what is the possibilities are infinite in that next moment, because we haven't yet arrived. So this projection, the capacity of the human mind to project into the future, is really just wiped out by emptiness. But we still need to be able to reach for that when it's a useful tool, in order to maintain our responsibilities. But when we use that tool, when we reach for future projection or envisioning, imagination, we're reaching for something that is a guideline or a guidepost or a possibility, but we're not closing down any of those other possibilities. I recognize I've digressed into other realms, but the problem with consciousness stuff is that, you know, every facet of consciousness is connected. And so once you start entering into, say, an experience of emptiness, you find all of these other aspects of the truth attached to it. And I think this is a good conversation just to address as well this idea of truth really briefly, which I've touched on before, as being multifaceted, and this like singular truth that we might be honing in on in the moment isn't the whole truth. That, you know, the emptiness informing open-mindedness, or the open field that lays before us, enables this way of relating to truth. That truth is always incomplete, that what we consider to be true will always be incomplete, and anything that could be true in the future will also always be incomplete. It's not like truth just kind of accumulates until you have the whole picture, or you look at every face of the diamond of truth and then you've arrived at the whole truth. The truth in this world as I experience it shifts and changes according to what unfolds in that open field before. So our decision to kind of narrow something down or to project into the field a particular form or a particular arising has an impact on what sort of truth arises from that field. So if we leave that field a lot more open, we're less likely to produce, and here we're kind of connecting in a little bit with ideas of karma and stuff as well. If we're not projecting into that open field, we're not going to produce things that are limited and I guess limited, restrict. I mean, they're the best words I can come up, because I don't want to say negative. You know, people get stuck in this idea of karma as like good karma, bad karma. Really what we're talking about when we speak about bad karma is a movement from wholeness towards separation. And what people might name bad karma is that stuff that moves us further and further into separative consciousness. And what people might name good karma is that which moves us further and further into the experience of the Great One, into wholeness, into remembering our true nature, our true being. So as we shift, you know, toward the more open this field is before us, that the empty embrace of what is arising moves us towards that wholeness, because it can contain and it can receive much more. Whether our projections are things that narrow that field, narrow that capacity, and narrow that container, reducing our travels towards wholeness. And there's actually, you know, when we say good bad karma, neither direction is necessarily from these more transcendental perspectives, good or bad. But we also don't want to get stuck in the transcendental. We want to recognize that on a relative level, it is good to move towards wholeness, to move towards unity, to move towards receptivity, and being able to allow for identification with beings other than ourselves, because that creates a more harmonious experience of our humanity. And emptiness is that receptivity, because an empty vessel can have any number of manifestations put into it, and it's got capacity for that. whether a lack of emptiness is not going to leave room for anything else. So they're all just metaphors. They're all just different ways of kind of tackling this. But you can see that like emptiness can be vastly frightening, and perhaps it is for you at the moment, but it also can be this profound capacity that over time, as you yield into it, as you soften, as you start to develop a relationship with emptiness that can be brought into your life rather than just experienced as this kind of like shocking void, it's actually a very, very beautiful, very useful thing. And the irony, this is where you get nothing and everything, right? That the no thing is the everything, because in emptiness, in the open field, in the ability to be a receptacle of whatever arises, then you're also everything. But that takes some time to work through, and it's a really natural thing to kind of go through, or at least it was in my experience. I won't speak for everyone, certainly, but to go through that phase with emptiness where it is just like profoundly painful to experience void, and scary and hard, and the openness of consciousness. You know, if you're trying to navigate life and you've encountered this for the first time, that open field of consciousness can feel really confusing about how to like make decisions or go forward or solve problems, the basics of life, which we used to use all of this projective capacity for. Now there's a no thing in the place of all of those projections. So how do we actually manage that? And the best advice I could give really from what I've come to is similar advice to what I've given in other places around any kind of experience of being able to tolerate the threshold and the liminal, that whilst that open field before us might seem to be begging for a projection to be put into it, to actually just see if you can relax a little bit and let the emptiness be there. Let the no thing, no thought, no decision, no solution, sit with that. And what you'll find over time is that the solutions will actually arise in that field in and of themselves. Of course, we still need to do, we still expend energy in the world and take action. But those actions will naturally be called for. You will actually sense within you a ripeness. I really like the word ripeness to describe it, like a ripeness for the moment of action, and a ripeness to the form that that action can take. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there for now. I know that it was a very twisty, turny, convoluted, yeah. But as I said, it's hard to put words to these things. Hey, if you are enjoying this content, like, subscribe, comment. It helps it get out to other people who are perhaps experiencing emptiness and feeling a bit overwhelmed by it. And I really appreciate your presence. Have a great day.